The stars above Velkanos Prime had looked the same for 3,000 years. Bright dots of light scattered across the black sky like diamonds on dark cloth. The people of the Valkan Empire looked up at those stars every night and felt proud. They owned most of them. Emperor Vextar stood on the highest tower of his palace, his four arms crossed behind his back. His golden eyes swept across the city below. Millions of his people lived in the great towers that reached toward the sky. Flying cars moved between the buildings like glowing insects. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. The empire stretched across 1,000 star systems. Every world they had found, they had taken. Every species they had met, they had conquered. The Velkans were tall and strong, with thick-scaled skin and sharp claws. They had built the greatest war machines the galaxy had ever seen. No one could stand against them. At least that was what they believed. The morning started like any other. Emperor Vextar sat on his throne, made from black stone and decorated with gold. Representatives from conquered worlds brought him gifts and promises of loyalty. The throne room was huge, with pillars that rose high into the shadows above. Guards in red armor stood perfectly still along the walls. General Corthex approached the throne. He was old for a Valkan, his scales darker with age. His forearms carried reports from across the empire. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head. "The outer systems report all is well. The new mining operations are ahead of schedule." The Emperor nodded. "Good. And the rebellions?" "Crushed as always." Corthex allowed himself a small smile. "The people of Zarian thought they could resist us. They learned otherwise. These conversations happened every day. The Empire was so large that there was always some small problem to solve, some world that needed to remember who was in charge. But the problems were always small. No one could really challenge the Empire. That was when the alarm started. The sound was low and deep, coming from speakers hidden throughout the palace. It was not the usual alert for a small problem. This was the sound that meant danger. Real danger. Emperor Vextar stood up from his throne. His golden eyes narrowed. "What is that?" General Corthex was already speaking into his communicator, his voice sharp with command. "Central Command report. What is the nature of the alert?" The voice that came back was filled with confusion. "General, we have a situation in orbit. There is a ship. What kind of ship? Where did it come from?" "We don't know, sir. It just appeared." The Emperor and his general looked at each other. Ships did not just appear. Ships came out of hyperspace with bright flashes and energy signatures that could be detected from light years away. Ships announced themselves long before they arrived. "Show me," the Emperor commanded. The air above the throne room shimmered, and a holographic display appeared. It showed the space around Velkanos Prime, with the planet at the center and its 3 moons spinning slowly around it. The usual traffic of Imperial ships moved in their regular patterns like clockwork, and there, hanging in space like it had always been there, was something impossible. The ship was huge. Larger than any Imperial battleship. Its hull was dark gray, almost black, and covered in what looked like scars. Strange shapes stuck out from its sides. Weapons, maybe, but unlike anything in the Imperial fleet. The whole ship looked like it had been built for war and had seen plenty of it. But the strangest thing was how it had arrived. The sensors showed nothing. No hyperspace exit. No energy burst. No warning at all. One moment the space had been empty. The next moment the ship was there. "How big is it?" the Emperor asked. The technician's voice was quiet. 2 kilometers long, Your Majesty. Maybe more. We're having trouble getting exact readings. Our sensors can't seem to lock onto it properly. 2 kilometers. The largest Imperial battleship was only half that size, and this thing had appeared without any of them knowing it was coming. "Where are our ships?" General Corthex demanded. "The 3rd Fleet is in system, General. Admiral Vorthak is moving to intercept." The display shifted to show the Imperial ships, sleek vessels painted in red and gold. They moved with the confidence of predators. The 3rd Fleet was one of the Empire's best. 40 ships, including 3 heavy battle cruisers. They had never lost a battle. They approached the strange ship in perfect formation, weapons ready. The mysterious vessel made no move to avoid them. It simply hung there in space, waiting. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Vorthak stared at the alien ship through the main view screen. He was a veteran of 100 battles, and he had never seen anything like it. The hull looked old but strong. The weapons were clearly advanced, but their design made no sense according to Imperial knowledge. Open a communication channel, he ordered. Channel open. Admiral? Vorthak's voice echoed across space, translated by computers into every known language. Unknown vessel, you have entered Imperial space without permission. Identify yourself immediately or you will be destroyed. For a long moment there was no response. Then the alien ship's communication system activated. The voice that came through was unlike anything the Velkans had heard before. It was deeper than their own voices, but smoother. It spoke with calm confidence. This is Captain Lee Daeho of the Terran Space Navy vessel Indomitable. We are here on official business. The bridge went quiet. Terran? No one had ever heard of such a species. The Empire kept careful records of every intelligent race in the galaxy. There were no Terrans in their databases. Captain, Admiral Vorthak said, you are in violation of Imperial law. State your business or prepare to be boarded. Admiral, came the calm reply. We are here to discuss the recent attacks on human colonies. I suggest you contact your superiors. They will want to handle this personally. Human colonies? Admiral Vorthak felt a chill run through his scaled skin. The Empire had been expanding into new sectors recently, clearing out primitive settlements to make room for Imperial citizens. They had not expected any of those primitive species to have ships like this. He turned to his communications officer. Get me the Emperor, now. Back in the throne room, Emperor Vexitar listened to the report with growing anger. Some unknown species was making demands in his own star system. In front of his own capital world, how many ships do they have? He asked. Just the one, Your Majesty. Admiral Vorthak's voice came through the communicator. But it's unlike anything we've ever seen. One ship. The Emperor's forearms clenched into fists. One ship dares to threaten the Empire. Your Majesty, General Korthak said carefully. Perhaps we should learn more about these humans before we act. The ship's technology appears to be very advanced. The Emperor's golden eyes blazed. No species is more advanced than the Empire. We have ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. We did not build this civilization by backing down from unknown ships. He turned to the communicator. Admiral Vorthak, you will give this Captain Lee Daeho one final chance to surrender. If he refuses, destroy his ship. Yes, Your Majesty. The communication channel to the human ship opened again. Admiral Vorthak's voice was formal and cold. Captain Lee Daeho, by order of Emperor Vexitar, you will surrender your vessel for inspection and submit to Imperial authority. This is your final warning. There was a pause. Then Captain Lee Daeho spoke again, and there was something in his voice that made even the experienced Admiral feel uneasy. Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not here to surrender to anyone. We're here to ensure that the attacks on our people stop. Permanently. The communication ended. Admiral Vorthak stared at the alien ship on his view screen. It had not moved. It had not powered up weapons or raised shields. It simply waited, like a predator confident in its own strength. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Vorthak wondered if the Empire might have made a mistake. In the depths of space, the Terran Battleship Indomitable hung motionless among the stars. On its bridge, Captain Lee Daeho looked out at the Imperial fleet surrounding his ship. His weathered face showed no emotion. Captain, said Navigator Park Soo-jin, they're powering weapons. Expected, Lee Daeho replied calmly. Raise shields. Prepare defensive systems. Should we power our weapons, sir? Asked Weapons Officer Kim Tae-min. The captain was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he shook his head. Not yet. Let's see what they've got first. It's important they understand the difference between us and them. Sir? Kim Tae-min looked confused. Captain Lee Daeho turned away from the view screen and looked at his crew. They were good people, volunteers from colonies that had suffered under Imperial raids. They had come here knowing they might not go home. They deserved to know why. The difference, he said quietly, is that they fight to conquer. We fight to protect. When they see that difference, they'll understand why they should be afraid. The Imperial fleet opened fire. The space around the human ship lit up like a small star being born. 40 Imperial vessels fired at once, their energy beams cutting through the darkness. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and fusion missiles all struck the same target. The combined firepower was enough to destroy a small moon. When the light faded, the Terran battleship hung in space exactly where it had been before. Not a single scratch marked its dark hull. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Vorthak stared at his sensors in disbelief. That's impossible, he whispered. His weapons officer, a young Vulcan named Crix, checked his readings 3 times. "Admiral, our weapons had no effect." "None at all. Their shields absorbed everything." Vorthak had been fighting for the Empire for 50 years. He had seen the strongest fortresses fall and the mightiest ships burn. But he had never seen anything like this. The human ship had not even bothered to return fire. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "the human captain is sending a message." "Put it through." Captain Lee Daeho's voice came through the speakers, calm and patient. "Admiral, that was a nice light show. Are you finished?" The bridge went silent. Even the low hum of the ship's engines seemed quieter. The human had just taken the best shot of an entire Imperial fleet and was asking if they were done. "How?" Admiral Vorthak asked, forgetting protocol. "How did you survive that?" "Admiral," Lee Daeho replied, "your weapons are impressive for their age. But we've been fighting a different kind of war for a long time. We've learned to build our ships to survive anything." On Velkanos Prime, Emperor Vexitar watched the holographic display with growing anger and fear. The readings made no sense. The human ship's shields had not just blocked the Imperial weapons. They had absorbed all that energy and converted it into power for their own systems. "General," he said to Corthex, "get me our best scientists. I want to know how they did that." "Already done, Your Majesty. Dr. Nixall is analyzing the data now." Dr. Nixall was the Empire's leading expert on shield technology. She had designed the defensive systems for their most important ships and stations. When she appeared on the communication screen, her usually confident expression was gone. "Your Majesty," she said slowly, "I've never seen anything like this. Their shields don't just block energy. They seem to be using some kind of adaptive matrix. The more power you throw at them, the stronger they get." "That's impossible," the Emperor snapped. "So I thought, Your Majesty. But the readings don't lie. Whoever built that ship understands physics in ways we don't." Emperor Vextar felt something he had not experienced in decades: doubt. The Empire was built on the idea that they were the most advanced species in the galaxy. If these humans had better technology, what did that mean for everything they believed? "Get me more ships," he ordered. "I want the entire home fleet here within the hour." "Your Majesty," General Corthex said carefully, "perhaps we should try talking to them first." They said they wanted to discuss something. The Emperor's golden eyes blazed with fury. "The Empire does not negotiate from a position of weakness. We will show them the true power of our civilization." In space, more Imperial ships were arriving every minute. The First Fleet, the Second Fleet, even ships from the Imperial Guard, the Emperor's personal forces. Soon there were over 200 vessels surrounding the single human battleship. Captain Lee Daeho stood on his bridge, watching the display show more and more red dots appearing around his ship. His crew worked quietly at their stations, but he could see the tension in their faces. "Captain," said communications specialist Choi Hyejin, "we're receiving thousands of targeting locks. They're really planning to hit us with everything they have." "Let them," Lee Daeho replied. "Sometimes the only way to teach a lesson is to let the students try their hardest and fail." Weapons Officer Kim Tae-min looked up from his console. "Sir, if they all fire at once, even our shields might not hold. Maybe we should show them what our weapons can do." The captain considered this. He had spent 6 months hunting Imperial raiders across the Outer Rim. He had seen what they did to human colonies: the burned cities, the destroyed farms, the families torn apart. Part of him wanted to unleash the full power of the Indomitable and watch the Imperial fleet burn, but that was not why he was here. "No," he said finally. "We're not here to destroy them. We're here to make them understand that destroying us is impossible." Dr. Park Yoon-ji, the ship's chief medical officer, spoke up from her station. "Captain, the crew's ready. Whatever happens next, we're with you." Lee Daeho nodded. He looked around at his bridge crew. Park Soo-jin at navigation, Kim Tae-min at weapons, Choi Hee-jin at communications, and the others. They were not the biggest or strongest beings in the galaxy, but they had something the Empire did not understand. They had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. "All stations, prepare for full defensive measures," he announced over the ship's communication system. "Show them what humans do when someone threatens our families." The second Imperial attack was larger than anything in the recorded history of galactic warfare. Over 200 ships fired at once, pouring enough energy into space to light up entire star systems. The beams were so bright that the automatic filters on every view screen in the system activated to protect their viewers' eyes. This time, The human ship did more than just absorb the attack. As the Imperial weapon struck its shields, the Indomitable began to glow with captured energy. Lines of power ran along its hull like lightning frozen in metal. The ship seemed to grow brighter and more threatening with every passing second. When the bombardment ended, the Terran battleship hung in space like a dark star, crackling with stored power from the Imperial attack. Impossible, Admiral Vorthak whispered again. His sensors showed that the human ship had not just survived, it had somehow become stronger. Captain Lee Daeho's voice came across all frequencies, broadcast to every ship in the system and to the planet below. "Citizens of the Valkan Empire," he said, his words calm but carrying an authority that seemed to reach across space itself. "We are the Terrans, humans from Earth and a dozen colony worlds. For months your fleets have attacked our people. You have burned our cities and killed our families. You thought we were weak because we were few. On Velkanos Prime, millions of Velkans stopped what they were doing to listen to the alien voice. You were wrong," Lee Daeho continued. "We are not weak. We are not few. And we are not going away. Your empire has ruled through fear and force for 3,000 years. Today you learn what it feels like to be afraid." Emperor Vextar stood in his throne room, his 4 fists clenched in rage. Around him, his advisors and generals watched the holographic display with expressions of growing concern. "He's bluffing," the Emperor said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "One ship cannot threaten the Empire." "Your Majesty," General Korthex said quietly, "I'm not sure he is bluffing." On the Indomitable, Captain Lee Daeho turned to his weapons officer. "Mr. Kim, select an uninhabited asteroid in the outer system. Something large enough to make a point." Kim Taman's fingers moved across his console. "Target selected, Captain. Asteroid designation VK4471, roughly 1 kilometer in diameter. No life signs, no mining operations. Fire 1 shot. Minimum power." The human battleship's main gun was unlike anything in Imperial design. Instead of energy beams or plasma, it fired solid projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds. The shot was invisible to the naked eye, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The asteroid that had existed for millions of years vanished in less than a second. One moment it was there, a rocky mountain tumbling through space. The next moment there was nothing but expanding vapor and dust. The flash of its destruction was visible from the planet's surface. In the Imperial fleet, silence fell like a heavy blanket. The sensors showed the energy release from the asteroid's destruction. The numbers were terrifying. That single shot had released more power than the main guns of their largest battleships, and the human captain had called it minimum power. Admiral Vorthak found his voice first. "Captain Lee Daeho, what do you want?" The response came immediately. "Admiral, I want to talk to your Emperor, face to face, and I want him to understand that the attacks on human colonies end today, permanently. And if he refuses..." There was a pause. Then Lee Daeho spoke again, and his voice carried a cold certainty that made even veteran warriors shiver. "Admiral, you've seen what we can do to an asteroid. Your planet has 3 moons. I'm sure your people are very fond of them." The threat was clear without being direct. The human captain was not talking about destroying cities or killing civilians. He was talking about changing the very sky above their world, about showing them that if he wanted to, he could remake their solar system. Emperor Vextar heard the transmission in his throne room. For the first time in his long reign, he felt truly afraid. Not afraid of death. He had faced that in battles long ago. But afraid that everything he believed about the Empire, about their place in the galaxy, might be wrong, Your Majesty, General Korthex said softly. "I think we should listen to what he has to say." The Emperor looked around his throne room at the faces of his advisors. He saw fear there, but also something else. Relief. Relief that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this that did not end with their civilization in ruins. The Imperial shuttle that docked with the Indomitable was a work of art. Made from polished metal and decorated with gold, it looked more like a piece of jewelry than a spacecraft. But Captain Lee Daeho was not interested in how pretty it was. He was interested in getting answers. He walked down the corridor toward the shuttle bay, followed by 3 members of his crew. Dr. Park Yoonji carried a medical scanner, not as a weapon but to study Valkan biology. Communications specialist Choi Hee-jin had her translation computer, updated with everything they had learned about Imperial language in the past few hours. and Sergeant Oh Kyung-soo, the ship's security chief, came along just in case things went wrong. The Indomitable was not like Imperial ships, where the Vulcan vessels were decorated with gold and precious stones. The human ship was built for war. The corridors were wide enough to move wounded soldiers. The walls had extra plating to stop explosions. Everything was designed to keep fighting even when half the ship was destroyed. "Captain," Oh Kyung-soo said as they walked, "are you sure about this? Going over there puts you right in their hands." Lee Dae-ho smiled grimly. "Sergeant, if they wanted to kill me, they would have tried already. Besides, they know what happens if I don't come back." They reached the shuttle bay where the Imperial craft waited. It was beautiful, but Lee Dae-ho noticed it had no visible weapons. Either the Vulcans were very confident or they were very careful. The shuttle's door opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the walls were covered with soft fabric and the seats looked more like furniture from a palace than equipment from a spaceship. Everything was designed to impress visitors with Imperial wealth and power. The pilot was a young Vulcan female with bright golden eyes. She wore a uniform of red and gold that looked like it cost more than most people made in a year. When she saw the humans, her eyes went wide. "You're so small," she said, then immediately looked embarrassed. Dr. Park Yoon-ji smiled. "We get that a lot. Don't worry about it." The pilot stared at them for a moment longer, then seemed to remember her duties. "I am Flight Officer Yelana. I will take you to His Majesty's palace. Please sit anywhere you like." As the shuttle left the Indomitable and headed toward the planet, Lee Dae-ho looked out the window at Volcanos Prime. It was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents. Cities sparkled like jewels across the surface. It looked peaceful and prosperous. It also looked like it had never been threatened before. "Captain," Choi Hyejin said quietly, "I'm picking up communication signals from the planet. News reports, government broadcasts, civilian chatter. They're all talking about us. What are they saying?" Mixed reactions. Some are afraid, some are curious. But most of them are asking the same question. How did one alien ship make the entire Imperial fleet look helpless? Lee Dae-ho nodded. That was the question he wanted them to ask. Fear was useful, but understanding was better. If the Vulcans could understand that humans were not just another species to be conquered, maybe there could be peace. The shuttle landed on a platform high up on the Imperial Palace. The building was enormous, made from black stone and decorated with gold designs. Towers reached toward the sky like frozen fingers. It was designed to make visitors feel small and unimportant. But Lee Dae-ho had seen the ruins of human colonies. He had pulled children from burning buildings and helped bury families killed by Imperial raids. No amount of pretty architecture could make him forget that. Flight Officer Yelana led them through corridors filled with art and treasure from across the galaxy. Statues from conquered worlds, paintings from destroyed civilizations, metals and gems from 1,000 different planets. It was a museum of Imperial conquest. "Your empire has been busy," Dr. Park Yoon-ji observed. Yelana looked proud. "For 3,000 years we have brought order to the galaxy. Every world we rule is better for it. Even the worlds you had to destroy to conquer?" Oh Kyung-soo asked. The young pilot's expression faltered. That was necessary. Some species could not accept the wisdom of Imperial rule." "And now?" Lee Dae-ho asked gently. "What happens when your empire meets a species that's stronger than you?" Yelana did not answer. They reached the main conference chamber and Lee Dae-ho had to admit it was impressive. The room was huge, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. The walls were covered with star maps showing the extent of Imperial territory. At the center was a long table made from a single piece of black stone. Emperor Vexitar was already waiting, along with several of his advisors. The Emperor was tall even by Vulcan standards, with dark scales and 4 muscular arms. His golden eyes studied the humans with obvious curiosity. "So," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "you are the ones who made my fleet look like children playing with toys." "Your Majesty," Lee Dae-ho replied with a respectful nod, "we are here to discuss a very serious problem. Your forces have been attacking human colonies in the Outer Rim territories. Those attacks must stop." General Korthek, sitting at the Emperor's right hand, leaned forward. "Captain, those territories are designated for Imperial expansion. Any settlements there are illegal." "According to whose law?" Choi Hyejin asked, her translation computer converting her words into perfect Imperial language. "According to the law of conquest," the Emperor said coldly. The strong rule. The weak serve. This has been the way of the galaxy for 3,000 years. Lee Dae-ho was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. Several Imperial guards tensed, but he moved slowly and carefully. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the center of the table. The Emperor nodded, curious. Lee Dae-ho placed the device on the table and pressed a button. A holographic display appeared, showing images from human colonies that had been attacked by Imperial forces. Burned buildings, destroyed farms, graves marked with simple wooden crosses. "These are my people," Lee Dae-ho said quietly. "Families who left Earth to build new lives on frontier worlds. They weren't soldiers or politicians. They were farmers, teachers, doctors, engineers. They had children who played in the dirt and dreamed of growing up to explore the stars." The images continued. A hospital that had been bombed. A school reduced to rubble. A playground where the swings still moved in the wind, but no children would ever play there again. "Your fleets came without warning," Lee Dae-ho continued. "No demands for surrender, no offers of negotiation. They simply attacked. When the colonists tried to flee, your ships hunted them down. When they tried to surrender, your soldiers killed them anyway." Emperor Vextar watched the images with the expression that was hard to read. "Captain, conquest is never pleasant. But it is necessary for order. Your people should have submitted to Imperial authority." "Your Majesty," Dr. Park Yoon-ji spoke up. "May I ask how you would feel if alien ships appeared over this world and started bombing your cities?" "That could never happen," the Emperor replied immediately. "The Empire is too strong." "So were we," Lee Dae-ho said quietly. "Or so we thought." He changed the holographic display. Now it showed images of the human colonies before the attacks. Happy families working together. Children playing in green fields. Cities growing under alien suns. It was a picture of hope and growth. "We spent 200 years building those worlds," Lee Dae-ho said. "Generation after generation of humans worked and died to create something beautiful in the darkness of space. And your empire destroyed it all in a matter of weeks." "That is the price of expansion," General Korthex said, but his voice was less certain than before. "No," Lee Dae-ho replied, standing up from his chair. "That is the price of thinking that strength gives you the right to destroy anything weaker than yourself." He walked to one of the star maps on the wall, studying the vast expanse of Imperial territory. "Your Majesty, your empire is impressive. 3,000 years of conquest. 1,000 star systems under your rule, but I want you to think about something." The Emperor's golden eyes followed the human captain. "What? In all those 3,000 years, with all that conquest, what have you actually built?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emperor Vextar's forearms crossed defensively. "We have built the greatest civilization in galactic history, have you?" Lee Dae-ho asked. "Or have you just taken what other civilizations built and put your flag on it?" He gestured toward the treasures decorating the chamber. "Every piece of art in this room was made by someone else. Every beautiful thing came from a world you conquered. What have the Velkans created that didn't come from enslaving or destroying someone else?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The Emperor's advisors looked at each other, searching for an answer. Finally, Dr. Nixall, the Empire's chief scientist, spoke up. "Captain, we have advanced greatly in military technology. Our weapons and ships are the finest in the galaxy." "Were," Oh Kyung-soo said bluntly. "They were the finest in the galaxy." "Your military technology is impressive," Lee Dae-ho agreed. "But it's all designed to take things from others." "What about medicine, art, philosophy? What about making life better instead of just taking it from people who can't fight back?" Emperor Vextar stood up, his height making him tower over the humans. "Captain, you speak as if conquest is somehow wrong. But it is the natural order. The strong survive and grow stronger. The weak are replaced by something better." The silence in the conference chamber stretched on for what felt like hours. Emperor Vextar stood at the great window, looking up at the stars where the human battleship waited. His forearms were crossed behind his back, but Lee Dae-ho could see the tension in his shoulders. General Korthex was the first to speak. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should hear what the humans want from us." The Emperor turned around slowly. His golden eyes were troubled. "Very well, Captain Lee Dae-ho. What are your terms?" Lee Dae-ho had been preparing for this moment ever since the Indomitable left human space. "Our terms are simple, Your Majesty. First, all attacks on human colonies must stop immediately. Second, your forces will withdraw from the outer rim territories where humans have settled. Third, you will provide compensation for the damage you have caused. And if we refuse? The Emperor asked. Then we will make sure you cannot attack anyone else, Li Daiho replied calmly. Ever. Dr. Nixall, the Imperial scientist, leaned forward in her chair. Captain, may I ask about your ship? Our sensors cannot understand how it works. The technology appears to be far beyond anything we know, Dr. Park Yoonji answered for the captain. Dr. Nixall, human technology developed differently than yours. While you focused on building bigger weapons to conquer others, we focused on building better defenses to protect ourselves. But how? Dr. Nixall pressed. Your shields, your weapons, even the way you travel through space, none of it matches our understanding of physics. Li Daiho considered how much to reveal. Doctor, we have been at war for a very long time. Not with other species, but with the universe itself. We learned to survive in places where survival should be impossible. We learned to fight enemies that could destroy planets with a thought. What enemies? General Cortex asked, his voice sharp with professional interest. The kind you hope you never meet, Oh Kyung-soo said grimly. Emperor Vextar returned to his chair at the head of the table. Captain, you speak of our empire as if it is weak, but we have conquered 1,000 worlds. We rule over billions of beings. How can you dismiss such power? Your Majesty, Li Daiho said gently. Let me tell you about a human colony called New Sol. The holographic display activated again, showing a beautiful world with green continents and blue oceans. Cities dotted the landscape like jewels. New Sol was one of our most successful colonies, Li Daiho continued. 2 million people lived there. They had built universities, hospitals, art galleries. They had figured out how to live in harmony with the planet's native ecosystem. It was everything we hoped human civilization could become. The image changed to show the same world after the Imperial attack. The cities were gone. The green continents were black with ash. Even the oceans looked different, polluted with debris from orbit. Your third battle fleet attacked without warning, Li Daiho said, his voice carefully controlled. They bombed the cities from orbit. When the colonists tried to evacuate, your fighters hunted down the refugee ships. In 6 hours, you murdered 2 million innocent people. The chamber was quiet. Some of the Imperial advisors looked uncomfortable. Dr. Nixall stared at the images with obvious horror. Among the dead, Li Daiho continued, was my daughter. The words fell like stones into still water. Emperor Vexitar's golden eyes widened slightly. Sumin was 8 years old, Li Daiho said quietly. She wanted to be a doctor when she grew up so she could help people. She had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy that she carried everywhere. She was in her school when your bombs fell. He paused, his hand steady on the table despite the emotion in his voice. After New Sol, I volunteered for the Deep Space Fleet. I spent 6 months hunting your raiders across the Outer Rim, learning how you fight, how you think, and I realized something important. What? The Emperor asked, his voice softer than before. You're not evil. You're just limited. The word hit the Emperor like a slap. Limited? Your Majesty, your entire civilization is built on a very simple idea, that the strong should rule the weak. It's an old idea. Humans believed it too for thousands of years. We fought wars over it. We built empires on it, and eventually we learned that it doesn't work. Li Daiho stood up and walked to the star map on the wall again. You see all this territory and think it makes you powerful. But what you've actually done is create a civilization that can only exist by taking from others. You can't create, only conquer. You can't build, only steal. You can't grow, only expand. That is not true, General Cortex objected. We bring order to chaos. We unite divided peoples under one rule. Do you? Choi Hee-jin asked. Or do you just force everyone to live the way you want them to? She activated her own device, showing communication intercepts from across the Empire. We've been monitoring your internal communications, General. Rebellions on 17 worlds, sabotage in 12 star systems. Entire populations that would rather die than submit to Imperial rule. Does that sound like unity to you? The Imperial advisors looked at each other uncomfortably. These were classified reports known only to the highest levels of government. Emperor Vextar's voice was dangerous. You have been spying on us? Your Majesty, Li Daiho replied calmly. We've been trying to understand you. The question is, do you want to understand us? He gestured, and Dr. Park Yoonji activated another holographic display. This one showed human colonies, not the destroyed ones, but the living ones. Cities built into cliffside. Farms that worked with alien ecosystems instead of against them, space stations that looked more like gardens than military bases. This is what humans build when we're not being attacked, Lee Dae-ho said. We don't conquer planets, we learn to live with them. We don't enslave other species, we invite them to join us. We don't expand by destroying, we grow by creating. Dr. Nixall stared at the images. How is that possible? How do you maintain order without force? The same way you maintain order in your own family, Dr. Park Yoon-ji replied. Through trust, cooperation, and mutual benefit. People don't rebel against a government that actually serves them. But without strong central authority, General Cortex argued, there would be chaos. Different groups would fight for resources. The weak would suffer. General, Oh Kyung-soo said, the weak are suffering under your system too. They're just suffering quietly. Emperor Vextar was quiet for a long time studying the images of human colonies. Finally he spoke. Captain, even if what you say is true, even if our way of governing is flawed, how can we change? The Empire is 3,000 years old. Our entire society is built on conquest and expansion. You cannot simply change that overnight. Your Majesty, Lee Dae-ho said, we're not asking you to change overnight. We're asking you to stop attacking us while you figure out what kind of civilization you want to be. And if we agree to your terms, what then? Then we go home and leave you alone. But we'll be watching, and if you attack human colonies again, or if you attack any other peaceful species, we'll be back. The Emperor stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, the stars shone peacefully, but everyone in the room knew that among those stars waited a ship that could destroy their entire world. Captain, the Emperor said without turning around, you say your technology is far advanced beyond ours. How many ships like yours do humans have? The question everyone had been thinking, but no one had dared to ask. Lee Dae-ho considered his answer carefully. Enough, he said finally. That is not an answer. Your Majesty, it's the only answer you need. Whether we have 10 ships like the Indomitable or 10,000, the result is the same. If you force us to fight, you will lose. General Cortex leaned forward. But surely you cannot have many such ships. The resources required to build something like that. General, Dr. Park Yoon-ji interrupted, you're thinking like an imperial. You assume we built our ships the way you build yours, by taking resources from conquered worlds and forcing slaves to work in factories. How else would you build them? By asking for help instead of demanding it. By trading instead of taking. By building alliances instead of empires. She activated another display, showing a vast network of connections between human colonies and allied species. General, humans have friends. Real friends, not conquered subjects. When we asked for help building ships to defend against the Empire, dozens of species volunteered resources, technology, and expertise. The scope of the network was staggering. Species the Empire had never heard of. Working together on projects the Empire could not imagine. It was a completely different model of civilization. Your Majesty, Lee Dae-ho said, we didn't come here to threaten you. We came here to offer you a choice. You can continue trying to build your empire through conquest and violence, but now you know there are species out there that are stronger than you. Species that won't simply submit to your rule. He paused, letting that sink in. Or you can learn to build something different, something that doesn't depend on taking from others, something that creates instead of destroys. Emperor Vextar turned around to face the humans again. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked truly uncertain. And if we choose the second path, what guarantee do we have that other species won't attack us while we are changing? Lee Dae-ho smiled, and this time it was warm instead of threatening. The week that followed was the longest in Imperial history. Across the Empire, emergency meetings were held on every major world. The footage of the human battleship effortlessly destroying an asteroid played on news channels throughout Vulcan space. Citizens who had never questioned their government's strength suddenly found themselves asking uncomfortable questions. Emperor Vextar sat in his private study, reading reports from across the Empire. The numbers were troubling. On Zarian Prime, the recently conquered population was celebrating, believing the humans had come to liberate them. On Thrakis, the local governor was requesting permission to surrender to the humans immediately. On a dozen other worlds, Imperial forces were dealing with riots and protests. General Cortex entered the study without waiting for permission. His old friend looked tired, older than his years. "The council meeting is ready to begin, Your Majesty," he said quietly. The Emperor nodded and rose from his chair. Together they walked toward the great council chamber where representatives from across the Empire had gathered. Some had come in person, others appeared as holograms, but all of them were asking the same question. What now? Meanwhile, on the Indomitable, Captain Lee Dae-ho stood on his bridge, looking out at the Imperial fleet that still surrounded his ship. The Vulcan vessels maintained their positions, but they no longer had their weapons powered. It was a small sign, but an important one. "Captain," Navigator Park Soo-jin reported, "we're detecting increased communication traffic between Imperial worlds. It looks like they're having some very serious discussions." "Good," Lee Dae-ho replied. "That's exactly what we want them to do." Weapons Officer Kim Tae-min looked up from his console. "Sir, we're also detecting some movement in the outer system. Long-range sensors show what might be additional Imperial ships jumping in. How many? Hard to say. At least 50, maybe more." Lee Dae-ho nodded. He had expected this. The Emperor was gathering his forces, probably planning for every possible outcome. "Keep monitoring, but don't power weapons unless they do first." Dr. Park Yoon-ji joined him at the viewing window. "Captain, do you think they'll accept our terms?" "I think they're smart enough to," Lee Dae-ho replied. "The question is whether they're brave enough to." In the Imperial Council chamber, the debate had been going on for hours. Representatives from across the Empire argued back and forth about what to do about the human threat. Some wanted to fight, convinced that the Empire's honor demanded it. Others wanted to negotiate, believing that survival was more important than pride. Admiral Vorthak, who had been in command of the fleet when the human ship first arrived, spoke to the assembly. "My fellow citizens, I have seen what these humans can do. Their single ship made our entire third fleet look like children playing with toys. If we fight them, we will lose. But if we surrender to them," argued Governor Zelthan of the Outer Territories, "we show weakness to every species in the galaxy. Every conquered world will see this as an opportunity to rebel." "Governor," General Corthex replied, "many of our conquered worlds are already rebelling. The news of the human ship has spread throughout the Empire. We are dealing with uprisings on 17 worlds." Dr. Nixel stood up to address the assembly. "My fellow Velkans, I have studied the data from our encounters with the human ship. Their technology is not just advanced. It represents a completely different understanding of science. If we fight them, they will not just defeat us. They will make us obsolete. Then what do you suggest?" Emperor Vextar asked. Dr. Nixal looked around the chamber before answering. "I suggest we do something the Empire has never done before. I suggest we learn." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some representatives shouted about imperial honor and tradition. Others talked about the practical realities of their situation. But slowly, a consensus began to emerge. They were afraid. For 3,000 years, the Empire had been the strongest force in their part of the galaxy. They had built their entire society on that strength, but now they faced something stronger and they did not know how to respond. Emperor Vextar called for silence. The chamber gradually grew quiet. "My fellow citizens," he said, his voice carrying across the vast room. "We face a choice that will determine the future of our civilization. We can fight these humans and likely be destroyed, or we can try to understand them and perhaps learn something new." He paused, looking out at the faces of representatives from across the Empire. "I have ruled this empire for 50 years. In that time, we have conquered 43 star systems and brought order to billions of beings. But I must ask myself, what have we truly accomplished?" The question hung in the air. For the first time in Imperial history, someone was questioning the basic assumptions of their civilization. "The humans showed us images of what they build," the Emperor continued. "Cities that work with nature instead of against it. Societies where different species cooperate instead of one ruling over the others. Technologies that create instead of destroy." Governor Malthan of the Core World stood up. "Your Majesty, are you suggesting we abandon everything our ancestors built?" "No, Governor. I am suggesting we build on it. The Empire has brought unity to a large part of the galaxy. That is an achievement. But perhaps it is time to ask whether we can maintain that unity without constant conquest and suppression." The debate continued for hours, but gradually the mood in the chamber began to shift. Representatives who had been calling for war began to ask different questions. What if the humans were right? What if there was a better way to organize galactic civilization? Finally, after nearly 12 hours of discussion, Emperor Vexitar called for a vote. The result was not unanimous, but it was clear. The Empire would accept the human terms. The next morning, a small Imperial shuttle requested permission to dock with the Indomitable. Captain Lee Daeho met the delegation in the same conference room where he had first spoken with Emperor Vextar. But this time, the Emperor was not there. Instead, General Corthex led the delegation, accompanied by Dr. Nixall and several other Imperial officials. Captain Lee Daeho, General Corthex said formally, "I am authorized to speak for His Majesty and the Empire. We accept your terms." Lee Daeho felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "General, thank you. I think this is the beginning of something much better than what came before." "We hope so," Dr. Nixall said. "But Captain, we have questions." "Many questions. If we are to change how our civilization works, we will need help understanding how to do it." "Doctor, that's exactly what we hoped you would say." Over the next several hours, they worked out the details. Imperial forces would withdraw from all human territories within 30 days. Compensation would be provided to colonies that had been damaged. Most importantly, a new communication system would be established between human and Imperial space. "But Captain," General Corthex said, "there is one more thing. His Majesty wishes to ask you a personal question." "Of course. You mentioned that your daughter was killed in the attack on New Sol. Given that, how can you trust us to keep our word?" Lee Daeho was quiet for a moment. The question touched on the deepest pain he carried. "General," he said finally, "I can't bring Sumin back. Nothing can undo what your forces did to her and 2 million other innocent people. But I can try to make sure it never happens again." He looked around the room at the Imperial delegation. "Trust isn't something you give away freely. Trust is something you build day by day through your actions. If the Empire keeps its word, if you really do try to find a better way to govern, then maybe someday there can be real trust between our peoples." "And if we fail?" Dr. Nixall asked. "Then you'll see us again," Lee Daeho replied simply. 3 days later, the Indomitable prepared to leave Volcanos Prime. The Imperial fleet that had once surrounded it was gone, dispersed to begin the process of withdrawal from human space. Emperor Vexitar stood in his private study, watching through the window as the human battleship began to move. It accelerated smoothly away from the planet, its strange engines leaving no visible trail. "Your Majesty," General Corthex said from behind him, "the ship is departing." "I know, old friend." They watched in silence as the Indomitable reached the edge of the system. Then, without any flash of light or distortion of space, it simply vanished. "How do they do that?" the Emperor wondered aloud. "I don't know, Your Majesty. But Dr. Nixall believes that if we can establish good relations with them, they might teach us." The Emperor nodded. "Corthex, do you think we're doing the right thing?" The old general was quiet for a moment. "Your Majesty, for 50 years I have served the Empire by conquering its enemies. But I think the time has come to serve the Empire by making friends instead." On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Lee Daeho looked back at the Imperial capital one last time. Communications specialist Choi Hye-jin was monitoring Imperial communications across the Empire. "Captain," she reported, "Imperial forces are beginning their withdrawal from the Outer Rim territories. It looks like they're actually keeping their word." "Good," Lee Daeho replied. "Helm set course for home." "Course laid in, Captain," Navigator Park Soo-jin replied. "Take us home." As the Indomitable jumped to hyperspace, heading back to human territory, Lee Daeho thought about his daughter. Sumin would never see the galaxy that was being born from this encounter.